Right?
This.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Essential Libertarians, giving you the tools for self-governance. I'm Kareem, your host, anarcho-pluralist, Lisonian voluntarist, and I have awesome people here with me. Insanity is Free from Anarch Unity. Check us out. We're all about promoting unity in decentralized fashions among different ideas, socioeconomic status, religions, whatever you are doing. Also, we have Noah, who's defeating the feds. He's based, and he's a gamer, and he has a cool Slayer shirt. And we have Keith Preston from Attack the System, who also is promoting anarchist unity and anti-imperialism. What's up, guys?
What's up?
We are run by fascists, and this does not change because Tucker interviewed Putin.
Fair enough.
No.
I wanted to actually ask about that. So I do have some excerpts from that. I didn't actually see the full interview. It was not released, but we said we
No. It was released.
It was released?
Yeah, it was released at 4 my time.
Did you watch it?
Yeah, I'm like 1 hour 45 in, so basically.
Okay. So I'm actually
I've not watched it yet.
I've not watched it yet, but I've looked at excerpts from it. Like he asked, hey, the president's not controlled by elected officials. He's like, yes. Now that's pretty common knowledge, but was there anything else that like stood out to you guys that you're like, oh, okay. I see a lot of people now are putting him on like, we got to get Tucker, put him on the list.
Did Putin mention the West being run by pedophiles?
No, but Nazis.
No,
had
but he says
quite a bit
like
to say about that.
Satanists or
Same
psychopaths.
thing.
And here's the interesting thing. All this stuff, to me, people freak out. All this stuff is not that crazy to say the government officials are run by whatever they are, psychopaths, or it's the mafia with a flag. And I think that's becoming more readily apparent and should be readily apparent that these people are not here to help you. They don't like you. They're not here for your benefit. As Ian Smith said, these people literally either despise you or just want to leech off of you, much like the mafia would. But the mafia is just more open. Hey, look, we're the mafia. We demand extortion. Here they're like, no. It's a W-2, guys. Oh, hey, look, it's a W-2. Oh, hey, look, there's a constitution. Oh, hey, look, there's there's our leader. Woo. Is it as bad as North Korea? No, but it's still an ideological superstructure.
So, like, one of the things that I'm really interested in that did come out of this,
okay,
Putin handed him a gray folder full of papers, and this gray folder full of papers allegedly has like the history of Russia as Putin would see it, like, as the official Russian government would see it through their lens. I want Tucker to release that fucking folder, the entire thing in its entirety. I doubt he will, but it'd be pretty cool if he did, because we would get to see how much of this is propaganda. We would get to see how much of what Putin wanted Tucker to get out of this is just like some sort of redacted, like altered form of history. And also we would be able to see how the common Russian person is basically trained to think about these issues, the lens which they're taught to see through. I want to see that folder. I think that'd be lit.
I want to basically, from like interviews like this, show people, I think, two things. One is that the hegemony of the West is slowly in decline, and that their leaders here, and then show them the exact opposite in a way. It's non-contradictory. Is that showing people that, hey, these government officials aren't really anything special. They're not out to really help you. Yes, you can have an interview and it can look polished with so-called leader, but that doesn't mean there's anything really special about. The Kremlin is just another central institution like Washington, D.C., like Beijing. As far as I'm concerned, Tucker Carlson is a decent journalist sometimes, but he's not anything. He's not like someone that I look to for like, oh, wow, this is amazing advice or anything like that.
No, he's not. He's not a journalist. He's a very opinionated columnist. He has a video column on Twitter that he used to have on fucking Fox News. It's not different now. He's a columnist. He writes from an opinion and like sort of him-centered framework most of the time. Now
He's
his
a propagandist.
like a lot of the time. And like he did the same thing with this interview that he did with Javier Milei, which is that he threw enough softballs that the person in question could either like answer something in a beneficial way that would make him look good for having interviewed Milei, Putin, um, any of the other people he's interviewed, really. And he also like would let them avoid certain things if they wanted to. In this case, God, I would be so fucking humiliated. Uh, Tucker kept on asking how certain things were relevant. Um, and like, I don't like it when people do that because like they interrupt you partway through your explanation and like you're trying to get the thing out there. And this was something that Putin was doing. He was like really elaborating on his side of the history, right? Um, like, and Tucker kept on asking how it's relevant and all these other things. Um, like in the middle of it, like while Putin was trying to speak. Now, fuck Putin. Fuck his bigoted fascist government. And their anti-LGBT fake Christian policies, their nationalists like fascist policies can go fuck themselves. But I would be pissed. Either way, the way he continually responded to Tucker, um, was so fucking I would be humiliated if I were Tucker because he just ran roughshod and kept on saying, "I was told this would be a serious interview," you know? And he kept on like using this language to describe various elements of Western shit. He described NATO and his request to join it and their response to that as kindergarten stuff. He kept on doing all this like diminutive, like the West is you know, good boy. You at a and he kept on doing all this shit, right?
Yeah,
And being like, and this is fascism, okay? Umberto Eco really nailed it down when he said that fascists have to pretend that their enemies are both weak and strong. Simultaneously, the entire world governments are coalescing around NATO, with the exception of BRICS. So the entire world is coalescing with NATO, and this is a dire threat that's like inching closer to our borders. 5 times he said that they expanded closer to our borders. And they tolerated it. He said that they became a bourgeois state so that they could cooperate with Western powers, which that's got to really piss off the tankies, right? Because they're all trying to pretend that this is an example of the success of communism and Western propaganda just can't hack it. But he just said we became bourgeois. So either way, point is, he's saying all this shit, right? Um, and he's pretending that all these world powers that are simultaneously strong enough to justify basically threatening world war, and running an extreme campaign of like war on Ukraine, on Afghanistan, on all these other powers, being like, oh, we have to assert regional dominance. Uh, he said that like they're simultaneously this huge power that we have to fight, and also kindergarten, and also unserious, and also small, and also it's like, oh, you're so adorable, you world powers we need to destroy because of an imminent threat. It's Umberto Eco planks of fascism
yeah.
right fucking there. You're pretending they're weak and strong at the same time. It's so transparent to those of us who know what fascism is.
Okay, so a couple things to unpack is this. And I'm very, very kind of in the, like, how would I describe this? When I see these interviews, I'm very like, okay, it's whatever, because I can kind of get that these journalists are most of the time playing around with questions and words, and they're not actually asking very, very serious questions. No one has asked Putin, and I think they should, how much are you influenced by the philosopher or the thinker Alexander Dugin? Because I think the real issue that I have is not so much the social policy of Moscow. I don't agree with it. But my problem is that BRICS, which is Egypt's part of, and a family in Egypt, they could potentially cause the same issues that we're having now. I don't think America is uniquely good or evil in the sense of having an empire. I think this is just how empires operate. And I'm not convinced by people who say we just want a multipolar world, but having all these countries together. And I'd love your thoughts on this, Keith, because you talked about getting anarchists together to fight against Wahhabism, to fight against imperialism, to fight against, these things. Fair enough. Let's say we did. Let's say these things are on the out, which I actually think these things are on the out. People are rejecting them. Do you really believe the claims on the BRICS side that we just want a multipolar world, whatever that means? Or does multipolar mean mud democracy in this side of the fence? Meaning, oh, we have a multipolar world. The United States isn't the main power anymore. All right, we're the new NATO. Hey, kids. And that's my main issue, is that these people are not, they pretend to be anti-globalists, but they're pro-globalists. So Noah, Keith, love your thoughts.
They just want Eurasian globalism.
The issue I see with that is when it comes to the Eurasianists, that is the people who follow the ideas of Alexander Dugin. From what I can tell, what they envision is something similar to what the West has been since the end of the Cold War, which is a block of nations that is globally hegemonic. And in their case, they want Russia to be the center of this new global hegemon, the same way the United States is the center of the Western-based global hegemon. If you look at a map of the Western Alliance, well, it's really the United States is like the mother country, and then it extends out to include NATO and other allied countries in Europe, and then the Pacific Rim and the oceanic countries and all of that. And Eurasianism strikes me as really just a Eurasian version of that, where Russia, rather than the United States, is the center. And then by extension, you have China or the BRICS countries or countries from the global south as part of this wider alliance. And the problem with the saying that that's anti-globalist is that the Eurasianists strike me as not so much being anti-globalists as much as a rival faction within globalism. It's kind of like when you have a corporation that's a multinational corporation, well, you may have a faction within the corporation that prefers different leadership or different policies or different business strategy or something like that, but they don't want to shut down the corporation. And Eurasianism is like that on a global scale. They strike me as not so much anti-imperialist as much as counter-imperialist, in the sense of wanting imperialism of their own, and they want a globalism of their own. I think that ultimately they want something where the BRICS are the global hegemonic power. The Chinese, I think they view themselves as wanting to go back and restore what they had during the Qing dynasty, which was when China was really the most advanced part of the world, 500 plus years ago. I remember when I was in college, I had a class on Chinese history, and the professor said, well, 500 years ago, you probably would have wanted to live in China because it was probably the best place to live for an ordinary person 500 years ago. And he said, in our Western-centric, culture, we have trouble understanding that. But I think the Chinese want to reclaim that position. And also in Russia, you have people who have ideologues from the Russian Orthodox Church and stuff like that. And I think Dugin falls into this category, where they see Russia as the third Rome. Like they see, they think of Russia, they think of the ancient Roman Empire and then they think of Byzantium as being the second Rome, and then they think of what they want Russia to be as the third Rome. So they sort of envision this Russo-centric uh, globalism or imperialism or whatever. That's really, in many ways, would be a mirror image of what the West has been for quite some time. Because you can make the same claim about the West. You could say, well, the post age of exploration Western empires were the second Rome, or the Holy Roman Empire, the British Empire were like the second Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the United States, the modern United States, the GAEs, as some people call it, the Global American Empire, is a third Rome from the West. So, it's really two sides of the same coin, and that's where I depart from these tanky people who say that, well, no, they will say, well, the imperialist core is the Atlantic countries and their allies. And then you have world socialism that's like the international left, that's like the opposition to imperialism. And nowadays, and it's not just the American style tankies, like it's not just guys like Caleb Maupin or Haas or Jackson who believe this, but internationally, this is a very common opinion on the international left. Like you could talk to, say, Marxists in Africa and Latin America and the Middle East and all kinds of places. And they will tell you that, well, world socialism nowadays is not just Marxism, Leninism. They'll say it includes Russia. They'll say like Russia's national capitalism is a form of national socialism, lowercase national socialism, and then they talk about China socialism with Chinese characteristics, and Bolivarian socialism in Latin America, and Ba'athist socialism and Islamic socialism, African socialism. But that's where the international communist or socialist movement is today. And the problem with that is the same problem I see with the Cold War era politics, is that what was Russia in reality in Cold War politics? Well, it was just the old Russian Empire. It was the Bolshevik Party seizing control of the old Russian Empire and then reinventing it as this modern communist empire, which is exactly what the National Socialists did in Germany. I mean, you had the old German Empire, the Bismarckian Wilhelmine German Empire that the National Socialists got control of, and they created this kind of freakish version of the historic German Empire. And we could argue Zionists have done something somewhat similar to the United States, but I really see this Eurasianism stuff, as just a variation of that. It's not anti-imperialism. It's counter-imperialism. It's not even anti-globalism. It's just sort of a rival faction within globalism that, it's like the team across town that wants to be the biggest team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these big tech corporations, like if they have the same politics, but maybe, one wants to be the top dog, like Microsoft wants to be the top dog, and then Facebook and Google. I'm like, no, we're for actually helping people. No, I would argue that, we just have rival factions. Now, I am interested maybe I'll play devil's advocate just to, get your idea, Professor. A lot of these people say, no, what the United States is doing is hegemonic, or maybe they're imperialism or dominism, trying to take resources. And I've listened to John Perkins. He wrote a book, Life of an Economic Hitman, where the CIA would go in and coerce. If that didn't work, then they take it. If that didn't work, then they utilize the military. And he said, well, China comes in now and they give us deals, which aren't the greatest deals, but they don't take out our leaders. So we're okay. We're not going to raise a huss and fuss because, maybe Xi Jinping is not directly interfering with their favorite ideologue. I guess my two questions are based on this. What do you say to people who say no? Because a lot of people do tell me we want I don't exactly understand the term multipolar. I keep thinking of polar bears or ice or cold, but they say we want a multipolar world, which I guess is like, okay, BRICS, and then we have Russia and Brazil.
Well, that's not what multipolar is. Multipolar means multi-power. Like, you've got, like, picture poles on a planet, like they're the centers of energy, And picture polarity as in like different sorts of like centers of power across the globe. Multipolar means that there's not just one pole of energy where everything has to coalesce. It's different poles of energy where things are competing and energy's flowing. It's like it's an analogy.
Okay.
Yeah, multipolarity, it merely means returning to a world like we had around the year 1900, where at the time we had about a dozen or so major powers that had their own empires and spheres of influence. It was the early American Empire, the British Empire was the biggest one, the Japanese were creating an empire, the Russian Empire, the Ottomans, and then you also had continental European countries that had empires of their own in Africa and Latin America and Asia, like you had the Dutch Empire, the French Empire, the Danish Empire, the German Empire. So you had about a dozen or so poles, and that's to some degree that's the direction we're moving in now, because we see that like you could say America is somewhat analogous to what the British Empire was around 1900 in the sense of being the biggest player on the field, but not the only player. And then the Russian Empire is very similar. I mean, Russia under Putin is very similar to the old Tsarist Russian Empire. And then you've got, ironically, the European Union is kind of like what the United States was in the late 19th century, early 20th century, in the sense of being a continental federation that's economically very powerful, but hasn't yet really projected international power on the level some of these other powers did. And then China's a lot like what France used to be in the sense that it's very expansionist within Africa and South Asia and places like that. And then you also have other rising powers, like Turkey is rising again, and then Iran, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, India, Brazil. We've seen a lot of rapid economic development in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, that whole region, and also even Africa. Africa now is experiencing a lot of rapid economic growth. So multipolarity just means different centers of power located in all these places. But I'm not so sure that the Putinists really want multipolarity, and that's I think they really want the Russia to be like the United States, or the pro Chinese tankies want China to be, well, China itself wants to be what the United States has been for since the end of World War II. And I think the BRICS axis is probably going to be somewhat unstable in the long run because of the historic rivalry between Russia and China and India. Right now, they're united by hatred of the United States. But I think that alliance would probably start to crack once they no longer perceived a common threat from the West. I think that all of those countries really are looking for a counter imperialism of their own, not so much an anti imperialism. And that's how old school imperialism was too. I mean, that's how historic colonialism and imperialism functioned. There was a bunch of different imperialisms that had their own spheres of influence. That's what led to World War I, because they all eventually clashed with each other. But as far as China, what you're saying about China is interesting, because what China has done is developed I guess a more advanced model of imperialism. And when I say advanced model, like traditional imperialism is just about conquest. It's just your army marches in and says, we're here now. And
hard power.
You pick out somebody, some local quisling to be your puppet ruler. And this model of imperialism goes all the way back to antiquity. And then you have what used to be called neo-colonialism, like a lot of post-war Marxist and Maoist theorists used to call this neo-colonialism. But that's really just the system that the United States developed after World War after World War II, rather. After World War II, all of the other colonial empires were destroyed in the war. So that left the United States holding the bag, and then the United States inherited all these old colonial empires and created this new global, it was still the Soviet Union, but they created this quasi-global system that was, they call it liberal internationalism, but really it was something where the United States uses the carrot and the stick. Like the United States would bribe other countries to be part of an alliance, but it was kind of like the mafia, where we'll provide you with protection as long as you do our bidding, but if you don't pay your protection money, we're going to come out and smash out your storefront windows or something. And that's the relationship the United States has had with most of the world since the end of World War II. That's what neocolonialism really is. It's like a system of maintaining a network of client states through bribery and extortion, and then threats. If you go too far in the direction the Americans don't want you to go in. But the Chinese, what they're cultivating is what I call debt imperialism. And that is, they basically are like loan sharks, or like usurers. That's really the best term for what they are. They're like usurers.
Yeah, they're competing with the IMF and World Bank. They're trying to do the same loaning shit that those people do in like third world countries, but them.
Yeah. So yeah, that's exactly what they are. They're like a usury racket that's trying to compete with the dominant body of usurers. So they've created this system of debt imperialism where they're not really trying to go out and send troops everywhere to go bomb people and shoot people, but they are basically just trying to get everyone indebted to them. And in exchange for developmental aid and stuff like that. So that's a whole new model of imperialism, debt imperialism.
But we know what happens when you can't pay your debts. And you're like, hey, I can't pay. Okay, then it does turn generally aggressive.
But the thing is, the Chinese wouldn't necessarily have to use the American method of just bombing people that fall out of line. They could also drive those countries into economic ruin. They could if they get if they get, say, South Asian countries or African countries completely indebted to them, then they can just pull the rug out from under them economically if they don't submit to political control. So they don't even need to use this kind of direct military power that the United States uses. Like, well, somebody did something we like, so let's just go bomb them. You could ruin a country economically.
Correct, but that's still going to lead to
some. Well, yeah, it's still imperialism. It's a more sophisticated model of imperialism.
All right. Well, here's my question. Since we recently had, one of my friends just said like bottom unity wasn't going to work, and then he spent 2 hours literally talking. Well, not 2 hours, maybe like 3 or 4, talking to Jeremy and myself. Me and Jeremy even had disagreements while we were talking, but then he came around and was convinced. And I honestly think people are looking for a solution. Do we have enough time to actually prevent another? I know they say history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Do you think, as from a pan-anarchist perspective, we have enough time to prevent this from happening again? Because it's quite tiring to see, how the United States empire crumbling. I don't think we want a Eurasian empire, and we have technology now. We have means to beat this as anarchists.
But see, here's the thing. So the first thing is, like, they definitely do want their own empire. That's the reason China is still fucking like bitching about Taiwan and a bunch of other shit. It's the reason Russia wants Ukraine back. And Putin literally said that because Stalin violated human rights and Ukraine has always been sort of an anti-Russian front, that's why they should be able to do that. Putin said that in the interview with Tucker. And I think that's also a place where tankies are going to just have their fucking brains explode. That little tiny last brain cell in there fucking blowing up. So I think that's hilarious. But the general vibe that I think we should give is that, like, when you have like all of these powers, it's always just a virtue signal when people say anti-imperialism. It's always, in America, we have to stop Russia. It's anti-imperialism. No, it's not. Ukraine wants a greater Ukraine empire. They're full of Nazis. The Decalogue of the Ukrainian nationalists started out by saying we're going to enslave foreigners. The Ukrainian government has been Western backed since 1955 with muscular and aerodynamic. All of this shit is public knowledge, bitch. So it's like, no, you don't want anti-imperialism just because Russia bad in the Ukraine war. Especially since, like, the reason they have the power and arms and whatever that they have now is because they worked with the global hegemony, which is why Russia says that they're justified. But Russia also isn't anti-imperialist or anti-Nazi. So it's like, we're not denazifying Ukraine because we have the Wagner PMC. I mean, at least we had a lot more of those before he started nuking these guys, because they fucking started to rebel against his bullshit, because he's a bourgeoisie. He admitted it in this interview. So the whole thing is like when you start to really realize, yeah, see, you can't be. Chris gets it. And by the way, thanks for the recent support. Uh, you can't be anti-imperialist and pro-Ukraine. It doesn't fucking work. It
Yes,
never will.
but okay. But to ask my question, Professor, since we have the advent of technology, when the American Empire started, we didn't. Like I can get conquest. I can throw down some conquest to bread to a bunch of people, which I actually think that would be more effective than anatomy of the state. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because Murray Rothbard is a very anarcho-capitalist and coming from individualist thought. So that's going to work better on individualist societies, but these are more we cultures. So I honestly think if we can promote ideas of Maltesta and Kropotkin and things like that, that maybe we can put a dent in this, whatever you want to call it, multipolar Eurasianism thing before it gets started. Do you think that's possible, or are we just going to go through cycles of empires and just have our small anarchist Twin Oaks and Giron and stuff?
Well, as far as preventing another major global hegemon from developing, I don't know that there's going to be a sufficient window of opportunity to build a world anarchist movement in the meantime. However, in a more intermediary level, there is the possibility of the development of something like the old non-aligned movement. Like during the Cold War, there was the development of something called the non-aligned movement, which still exists today on a more watered down level. Which was intended to be a coalition of nations that were opposed to both the Soviet bloc and the American Western NATO bloc. And the leadership of that alliance, or it wasn't really a military alliance, but it was sort of like the UN light or something. But the non-aligned movement was organized by somewhat influential countries that were not particularly friendly to the Soviets or the Americans. Like Yugoslavia under Tito was one of them. Nehru's India was another one. Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana was another one. Those are some of the leading countries involved. But the idea was they wanted to create a third force that would largely represent nations of the global South that were constantly being attacked by either the Soviet allied forces or by the West. And nowadays, I think the non-aligned movement represents something like 120 member countries, out of 190 some in the world. So it would be possible to have something more like that as a counterforce to a new hegemon, something like an alliance of small countries, which is most of them, against these major powers. That is probably a much more realistic intermediary stage. Although I don't see a whole lot of movement towards that either. What seems to be happening is that much of the world has gotten so aggravated with the West that it's created opportunities for the BRICS to not only mount a challenge to the West, but also take much of the rest of the world with them, like the global South and much of the Islamic world. I mean, you see that in terms of the reaction to the invasion of Ukraine when the Western Alliance, came out and imposed sanctions on Russia and, condemned the invasion and all that. But you see that most of the other rest of the world just simply refused to participate in that. And increasingly now we see more and more countries joining the BRICS. Like how many countries are in the BRICS now? It used to be it was just 4, then it was 5. Now Iran has joined, I think, and Saudi Arabia. Countries that are historically enemies of each other have joined. Countries from the Sunni bloc, the Shia bloc, the global South. And the reason for that is the West has largely blown a lot of its political capital. So that's why a lot of the world is moving towards the BRICS. Although another thing that has to be considered, and the fellow that you like, Kareem, Shahid Bolson, in one of his videos, he was talking about this. And I've also seen Paul Kudenek from the Winter Oak website talk about this. this.
Mm-hmm.
Have to consider the role of transnational elites in geopolitics because, as Anthony Sutton demonstrated, decades ago, there's always been transnational elites that, in many ways, coordinate their activities behind the scenes in ways that transcend national borders and in ways that transcend even countries that are formerly enemies with each other. Like Anthony Sutton documented how a lot of Wall Street bankers helped fund the development of the Soviet Union, or how
Yes.
in World War II you had American companies that were selling oil to or energy to the Third Reich. It was and in the Cold War you had that. One thing that Anthony Sutton brought to the surface is that when the Vietnam War was going on, you had the American capitalists and American bankers loaning money to the Soviet Union through the world banking system, and then using that to purchase military equipment that was in turn provided to the Vietnamese that were fighting the Americans. So it's like the international bankers were funding both sides of the Vietnam War. So you've got that kind of stuff to contend with, and some other commentators have pointed out, now that the West seems to be kind of flaking out in many ways and the BRICS are rising, you're starting to see some of these transnational elites trying to get their hands into the BRICS. I know Paul Kutnek on his website talks about this, the ways in which forces like like all the major banking houses of Europe and all that, how they're trying to get their hands in Brazil and get their hands in Russia, the Rothschilds and all of this kind of stuff. So you've always got these shadowy international forces that are there, along with the actual national states that are involved, and then the institutional sectors that they're aligned with, like transnational companies. So it's likely that even as the BRICS rises or as the global South rises, these transnational elites are going to shift their focus to those countries as well.
Okay. Well, and definitely Noah's back, so I'd love to get Noah's perspective on that. But I agree with you that
Sorry
there are.
about that. My phone died.
Oh, okay.
I need to put a shirt.
Yeah, but you look good. You look. Noah's getting jacked.
I'm not that jacked. I'm still fat, but I've been doing arm work.
Nice. Get those arms. I guess my question to all of this then, Keith, would
Wait.
be.
Someone in the comments said "loser city stream." What does that mean?
That's a group I'm a part of. They're joining the stream. It's a running thing. Like, everybody in Loser City is a loser. I'm in Loser City, so I'm a loser too. So,
I thought they were calling all of us.
Shout out to Loser City on Reddit.
So Keith was talking about international bankers funding both sides of the Vietnam War. I'd like to hear about how they were funding the Viet Cong.
Well, the Viet Cong were being supported by the North Vietnamese. Like a lot of people to this day, Americans at least, don't understand what was really happening in Vietnam. It's generally known that Vietnam had previously been a French colony that grew out of the old European colonial system, and then Vietnam at one point had been partitioned between the independent North under Ho Chi Minh, and then the South, which remained a de facto French colony, and then later the Americans became involved. But the Vietnam War started as a civil war within South Vietnam itself. Like, people will say, yeah, it was a civil war, right? The North versus the South, just like our civil war in the United States. But the Vietnam War started as a civil war in South Vietnam. And what happened was you had the colonial government, the French puppet government, neo-colonial government, and then you had the fighting the Viet Cong, who wanted to reunite Vietnam with the North under communist leadership. Interestingly, you had a lot of other groups involved in the Civil War who were both anti-colonialist and anti-imperialist and anti-communist as well. For example, you had Catholic militias and Buddhist militias. There's a religion in Vietnam called Ca Dao, which is Westerners aren't familiar with, but they had their own armed struggle groups as well. And what happened was the government of Vietnam, they were against the Viet Cong in the North, but they also were against these other groups as well. So they tried to repress all of these other groups, which had the effect of only strengthening the Viet Cong. So the Viet Cong came to be viewed as the leading opposition to this Western puppet government. And then after the French got tired of fighting, they just, they pretty much gave up. And the Americans came in and took their place. And what the Americans would do is if they had a government in Vietnam that was not compliant with the United States, they get rid of it and put in another one. For example, the Americans engineered the assassination of the president of Vietnam, a guy named Diem, because he was too hesitant to invite a full invasion of South Vietnam from America. Like the Americans wanted to launch a full-scale invasion of South Vietnam. Diem was opposed to that, so they killed him, and they put in a guy named Q, who was became the American puppet ruler. I mean, he was like Pinochet, only Vietnamese.
Was he president during the Vietnam War?
Yeah. Then the Americans launched a full-scale invasion of Vietnam, and then you started seeing North Vietnamese forces getting in on behalf of the Viet Cong. So the Viet Cong were an indigenous, well, I mean, not necessarily like indigenous people, but like within South Vietnam, the Viet Cong were a revolutionary insurgency that was native to Vietnam itself. They were aligned with North Vietnam. They shared the same communist ideology, and North Vietnam was aligned with the Soviet Union, the Viet Minh. The Viet Minh was the ruling party of North Vietnam. So they were aligned with the Soviet Union. So you actually had the Soviet Union backing the North Vietnamese, who were in turn backing the Viet Cong and who were fighting the Americans. But then Soviet technological development and military development was being done with financial resources like loans and trade favors and all kinds of things that they got through international financial institutions that were controlled by American capitalists. Anthony Sutton has a series of books about this from the 60s and 70s that get into that quite a bit. In fact, there's an old documentary that's on YouTube from 1969 that talks about this. It's called something like Financing Communism While Ostensibly Opposing It. But it gets into how you had these international bankers that were basically making money just by funding every side in the Cold War, including the actual army.
And all other wars.
Yeah.
That documentary presented by G. Edward Griffin?
No, I don't think so. I know who G. Edward Griffin is. It was presented by people with similar views to his, though. It was very, very right libertarian, paleo-conish, John Bircher type people. Because Sutton's work was extremely popular with them. Let me see if I can find that. It's probably online somewhere.
That's actually really interesting information, because as far as I'm concerned, this follows a pattern. They have a false flag. Both sides fund the war. The corporations that profit from the war, the MIC, make money, and that's coming to an end. I guess my biggest thing is, I don't think if we're interested in history, if we're interested in maintaining any sort of civilization in the world, that we want these things to keep actually going on. So even though
don't though?
Right.
Maybe get a little anti-civ in this bitch and realize that this is a problem that has consistently been fucking us over, and that maybe civilization as it stands is not the defensible norm.
How about we educate people on how central banks profit from war by lending money to countries with interest?
Yeah, and for the record, I'm not anti-civilization, but I understand that John Zerzan, Derek Jensen, and I do agree with a lot of the primitivist arguments. That being said, I think we should do different experiments with different societies and see, A, how do they work together, and B, how do they work on their own? Like, how is this society is it viable? How's it working? What's going on with it? That's the best idea I have, and the best way to do that is bring people together, promote liberty, and also help people understand that anarchism is actually the best form of organization. As Maltesta said, it's organization, organization, and more organization. Just how do we get that organization, A, in front of people so they can understand it, and B, so they can implement it, C, so it creates as much wealth or greater than state-run societies. I think it's possible in the long term. People are more open to anarchism, I think, now than they have been before. So we have a good opportunity, a good window to promote it. And I'm not saying it necessarily stops BRICS, but the more and more we promote it, the more and more we can, A, defeat the going out American empire and also stop further.
Going out.
Look,
I think that's fucking
I'm not
hilarious.
into-
If it was going out, it wouldn't be necessary to have this fucking global conflict for
okay,
anybody. If it was just going out, it's not going out, it's ramping up. That's why these people are treating it like a threat.
okay. Here, I'll simplify it like this. I'm not against civilization, but I think it needs voluntary cooperation. And Age of Empires should be a game on my computer if we really want to advance human development or social and economic development. Age of Empires should be a computer game. We need to end the Age of Empires and find ways to cooperate in a decentralized fashion. What does that look like?
Rambo 3 was State Department propaganda, by the way.
Fair enough.
What is State Department propaganda? I didn't quite.
I'm talking about the military entertainment complex, how federal agencies oversee certain Hollywood productions so that they can brainwash the public into accepting that the U.S. government is necessary.
Yeah, like the CIA military industrial thing, like Zero Dark 30, Jack Ryan, all these things.
Even some Marvel movies, you can argue, are part of this. Like, I mean, the Winter Soldier, the whole message is, oh, it isn't the U.S. government that's bad. No, it's just the Nazis that infiltrated, which I'm not downplaying it. It does.
Oh, yeah.
Operation.
The original Top Gun movie, the old one from the 80s, was like the best, Air Force recruiting film ever made. The Air Force will tell you that film did wonders for their recruiting.
Independence Day is literally globalist propaganda when you think about it. It literally has every government of the world banding together to stop aliens.
Yeah, like that. It's like propaganda, but for like and the worst part. Okay, here's my shit, and I've been saying this for a while. Fuck space, and anybody who promotes space, like space itself, Elon Musk, NASA, all these motherfuckers, and all these sci-fi movies that try to make it seem like, wow, we're going to unite as a humanity against the Allens, who are obviously aggressive. It's just new fucking jingoism, xenophobia, literally meaning alien fear of the foreign, fear of the so foreign to this planet is that, and there's no evidence that aliens could travel here, but if they could, they're not going to give a fuck because we don't got shit and we're fucking stupid compared to whoever could travel here. So, like, ultimately, like, my deal is I see all this bullshit that tries to glorify garbage, and I see all the things that are being built because of it. Satellites, fucking like fucking energy transfer mechanisms, directed energy weapons. I see the like on the ground systems of control that have been built by NASA, all the technology that's come out of that. I see the surveillance capabilities and the fact that this shit is used by the military intelligence industrial complex. And I think if I wanted to make people really fucking scared so that they would think this is all necessary, maybe I'd make a long series of alien movies that make them seem like the threat instead of my power. Maybe I would use these alien movies as additional allegories for Russians and communism and the way that those people think. And maybe I would gradually propagandize people into Western establishmentarianism by having, you know, space globalists like the UNSC and the Federation and all these other cuck organizations that want you fucked over and want your money in their pockets so that you'll own nothing and be happy. Like, maybe I don't want fully automated luxury space state communism. Maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe. And so, like, I see all this shit and I'm like, this is just propaganda. And what's the result? You get these space programs and everybody's like, ooh, it's going to be Star Trek. No, it's not. It's going to be Elon Musk globally monitoring the planet, sticking wires in your brain, making you think that his company is like Tesla building shit like the Cybertruck isn't just a weird, shiny distraction to charge a whole lot for a piece of shit so that he can fund his fucking stupid empires, control your speech, copy WeChat, surveillance state everything. And maybe this isn't a good thing. And maybe if these people could, you know, actually fight the deep state and pull their fucking head out of their cock for 2 seconds, they'd realize that Elon Musk was working with literal InQtel CIA fuckfaces in the beginning of SpaceX and like works with regulatory capture agencies to make Tesla profitable and is a globalist World Economic Forum whore and is a piece of shit fascist who we should hate. Maybe that's a fucking thing we should say. Yo.
And hung out with Ghislaine Maxwell. There's literally a photo right next of him right next to her. It's not Photoshop. You can look this up.
Yep.
If I'm lying, please fucking send a federal agent to kill me at the spot.
Man, everybody who went to Epstein's Island and was friends with those people should be, but Trump and Elon Musk and our favorite Republicans we jack off to Daki Makurazov. We gotta keep our body pillows clean. We can't throw those out. Fucking losers. Hate them.
At least Star Wars promotes killing Empire instead of glorifying it.
It does, but my issue is even most movies and video games now with Call of Duty, they're all promoting some type of in my opinion, propaganda towards the state, or B, there's very few, in my opinion, good projects that actually promote like free thought ideas, particularly in my opinion, because if you promote anything, Immortal Technique has talked about this, who's a prominent rapper, if you promote anything that's actually against the system's narrative and you start to really get popular, they won't sign you, they won't consider you. Record labels or video game, companies won't help you out. They won't. It's got to be all done independently, which kind of sucks. If you're actually really, in my opinion, generally against the system, they're not going to promote you in the way they would. Now, to me, there's a lot of, like Jeremy was saying, there's a lot of people who are controlled opposition, or like, look, these guys they're fighting some people. And I would definitely put Trump, Elon, Russell Brand, even a lot of these people in that case, because I don't really think they pose any actual solutions that are going to get us out of this status paradigm. They just want to flip the status paradigm in this particular way.
That's the problem with the original Star Wars trilogy. They weren't, the Rebel Alliance weren't anarchists. They just wanted democracy.
Correct.
Or go. You were finishing.
I'm trying to finish my thought.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make a comparison between the Rebel Alliance to a modern day Patriots, or maybe center leftists. I usually get more of a democratic socialist vibe from the Rebel Alliance, especially in new Disney productions surrounding that time period in Star Wars.
I like that in the new Disney ones that all you had to do is have one suicide bomber. They're actually encouraging terrorism, which is pretty based, or CIA, depending on where you come from.
I actually, for me, the first trilogy was really good, really enjoyed it, and then I enjoyed the second trilogy of how, but I kind of wanted to put it to rest there. I don't really like trying to just push a series that was very good. Like, oh no, we need to make more and more and more and more. Please stop. Like, there's a point where something is just good. Please
The
stop.
prequels, the prequels are basically an allegory for how the state really works. Palpatine is an allegory for central banking and old money families.
Man, that's offensive.
False flag terrorism is a prominent theme.
Hey man, Palpatine can put a sentence together. He's doing better than Biden and Trump. So I want to give some credit. Keith, we got someone else joining, but I want to get your take. When you see Star Wars, do you see anything? Because they do have subtle things like Obi-Wan's like, oh, I'm not a Sith. I'm for democracy. It's like, oh, wait, he's a good guy. Does the Jedi or the Sith, or does anything that George put out have?
Imagine if Obi-Wan read Hoppa. He'd change his mind, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about Star Wars. I saw the original film when it came out, which was what, in like 70s?
Hey, Chris. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm up here now. Cool. Am I allowed to smoke cigarettes on this platform?
I don't think it matters. What were you going to say, though, Keith?
Yeah.
I don't know much about Star Wars. I saw the original film when it came out in the 70s. And I did see the next two sequels to it after that. But there's the one, is it The Empire Strikes Back? Is that the second one? And then there's one after that with the little bear-like characters in it.
Ewoks, yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of like Muppets or something.
Furry Star Wars confirmed.
Yeah,
Star Wars Oompa Loompas.
Yeah, I saw all of those films those old ones when they came way back when they came out, but that's been what, like 40 years or 45 years.
Damn, man. You've been through some film history then, huh?
Yeah, I know. I did see one other Star Wars movie. I remember there was one that came out, I guess, in the 90s. It had the woman in it that's married to Michael Douglas, whatever her name is.
Natalie Portman.
No, that's not it. She was in V for Vendetta. Maybe she was in Star Wars too. But there's another woman that was played a princess or something in one of the first later sequels to Star Wars. I know in real life she's married to Michael Douglas, the actor, the son of Kirk Douglas.
Catherine Zeta-Jones.
That's the one. Yeah, I saw that one. I didn't think it was particularly memorable. I mean, I don't really remember much about it. I guess it was around 25 years or so ago that I saw that. But that's about the level of my familiarity with Star Wars. I mean, whenever I see Star Wars memes and stuff, I mean, I know who R2-D2 and Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi and all those people are.
I always metaphorically categorize like the modern world into Alien with the West Corp.
Well, I actually knew a lot more about Star Trek. I grew up watching the old TV series from the 60s, and then the original movies with the old cast, William Shatner and those people, and then the early spinoffs. I've seen some of them. Man. Yeah. Well, here's an interesting point about Star Trek, though. The guy who created Star Trek, Roddenberry, was like a staunch Kennedy, JFK liberal. And if you look at the themes in Star Trek, you see that the Federation is basically the UN. And
they're space globalists. I keep telling people.
Exactly. What's funny though is that they have this prime directive, which is supposed to be about self-determination for all this Wilsonian idea, but then they're always violating it for human rights or something. It's like, well, they go to this planet, and it's like, well, you're supposed to have self-determination here on this planet. It's our prime directive, but you're not really doing things the way we like. So we're going to have to violate our prime directive because, you folks aren't really respecting our view of human rights or something. I mean, it's basically Samantha Powerism, it's Samantha Powerism in space.
But it's for your own good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my whole thing. I'm all about space as long as it shows how shit it is. My idea of good sci-fi is The Expanse. The Expanse fucking rules because The Expanse, it follows the laws of science. You're not going to have magic artificial gravity. You wear magnet boots, bitch. You're not gonna have like fucking magic food cloners. If you run out, you die, bitch.
You know who's good at space?
If you fly off, you're gonna die if somebody doesn't come with a shuttle, which is very hard to maneuver because it's space. And there's a lot of people who die, and there's a global power. There's a sort of interplanetary power struggle between Mars, who has its own government, and the Belt, which is sort of the working class, like proletariat, having an uprising against both planets, both Mars and Earth, and powers playing against each other, and the UN having issues working against like its own interests and the people's interests and shit like that. And it's like the Expanse fucking rules because space sucks. And any show that doesn't fucking do that is trying to piss in my mouth. I'm not into that.
Yeah, I've got an anarchist friend that's really big on things like Mars colonization and all that. I mean, he's serious about it. He does presentations for like,
I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah. Well, he'd be disappointed to hear this live stream because he's.
I hope you send it to them.
Well, his thing is, he's hoping that someday we'll have anarchist space colonies and that kind of stuff.
I'm down for that. hey, I have a counter for you, Mr. Insanity is Free. Sega made Phantasy Star. Oh, take that. Boom.
Yeah, they did. They also had Eggman controlling the moon to brainwash the people with fake sunlight rays as he created an artificial eclipse. Sega is pretty woke on this subject. They know how much space will suck if the government is in control. Sonic Adventure 2 was all about how a government operation held in space because it was outside outside the Earth's laws, was like a very corrupt thing designed to create a bioweapon in the name of solving Maria's illness. And so that like we're gonna help you, Gerald. We're gonna help you with your daughter's space aids, but we're gonna also make this a weapon and then slaughter everybody on board, including Maria right in front of Shadow, her only friend and his only friend, giving him PTSD, by the way, and like causing this massive problem where they had to go get Shadow because he was like revealed to the world, and the government had to keep everything covered up because Sega understands that the people who control the power and the money really control the destiny of a project. And they understand that if you give the power to the state to run the space programs, they're going to fuck you on that. They're going to destroy your shit and then slaughter people to cover it up.
Yes, but you just need the right people like Master Chief and the Spartans and Halo.
It depends. Yeah, it depends on the government, I think. I mean, the U.S. was sending monkeys into space, and they're not native to America. Apes, sorry. For any offense.
So, like, I'm all about if you can do anarchist versions, but you're not going to, because the people who run space, the people who own the satellites right now, are the owning class, the ruling class. They are the state capitalists. They are the people who are incentivized by the state. Elon Musk runs contracts with the intelligence and military industrial complexes for Starlink. And NASA was like, checks notes, not different. And they also were heavily staffed by Nazis. And Elon Musk is heavily supportive of Nazis. And I wonder where this is going. Maybe we shouldn't be giving the fascists the reins of the space program. And if we do, I'm right in saying that it's not going to be anarchist until we crush that first. We're
the DPRK satellites are owned by the people.
Sorry, what?
The DPRK satellites are owned by the people.
Uh-huh.
Okay, actually, I'm interested, Chris, because you came in here, or Slickadelic, whatever you want me to call you. I know you connected with Insanity on Twitter, so be curious. I'm looking at your caption. So you were former U.S. You say you were part of Antifa, and then now I guess you're hanging out in the Philippines. So be interested to just get a real quick synopsis on your background.
Oh yeah, okay. So you can literally Google me, Chris Senek, and I sued a state trooper for beating the shit out of me for skateboarding, and I used that money to travel to the Philippines to take over a familial estate because none of my cousins wanted to come back here. So that's the basic like surface level.
Nice.
I've been out here for 5 years now.
Okay. Can I ask a question since this former U.S. Antifa?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing in that group, I think they do have two serious problems. I don't completely disagree, but here's my issue, is that there's a lot of, and I'm trying to combat this on the right, but the left also needs to give me a little bit of help, is they need to actually get serious about decentralized communes, or what I would, what the actual technical term is, anarcho-communism. So instead of smashing Starbucks, which we're already boycotting successfully because of, their bad decisions in helping the Likud government.
Israel.
Yes. So what I would say is, what I'd like to see the left do is more Maltesta, or complete Maltesta, less Marx. So that's one thing I was going to ask you about when you were Antifa. Like, do they have a coherent structure on what they want to see on the left? I know it's decentralized, but I still think you can make coherent structures on the left to say, hey, we want to establish physical communes or federation or whatever it is. And
I'd say the U.S. is structured a lot differently than other places because people are so mobile, per se. Like, if you get another job somewhere, you can just like up and leave. So people aren't really like stuck to where they are. And with I'm assuming you guys are either libertarian or left anarchist. So concentrations of people that are like-minded and things like that aren't going to be represented very well in the US because of the media structure, the way that the culture is. So having like bases of power, and I would say I'm actually more like top left, more of a tanky nowadays. But like when Mao was building the Protracted People's War, it's very decentralized somewhat. And in order to like build up those bases of power, you really got to be locally around each other. Antifa is very scattered. They take security culture to a very big extreme, so you're not really going to trust anybody that's not from your town, that sort of thing. And it really runs into a lot of issues whenever you're going to a big event or something like that. You don't know anyone, you're not trained in what to do, that sort of thing. It's very not. That's one of the reasons I'd say former, I guess. The Ferguson riot really opened my eyes to a lot of those facts.
Okay. I'll just say one thing, even as you're saying it tanky, but I would say, hey, would you consider that model of Marx and Engels, every time it's been tried with the transition period, no one's actually given up power? So the best thing I think to do, if we ask people on the right to stop saying helicopter man, or stop saying, hey, I like Mussolini or whatever. I don't actually see that a ton. But, you can pick your favorite right-wing dictator, Francisco Franco. If we're going to ask them to do that, then I think it would be also productive on the same level to say, hey, maybe the transition period didn't work. And even if you're a devout tanky and you say Marx was right, Marx essentially was trying to get, if you believe him honestly, to not the transition period, but to a decentralized commune. So would it be better to, take a trip down to the red, instead of going red, go to the green and see how to do that? Because honestly, the root word of communism is communal.
Well, so the organization of society under a socialist program would be a lot different, per se. For governmental departments and things like that, under an ideal socialist structure, they would be through the unions of those, like what a Soviet is per se. Soviet is a collection of workers of certain industries that are they're the local government of that area, but it's very working oriented, very working group organization oriented. So from there, and that's something where like Marxist Leninists, or so not all of us per se, but we say that we adapt for the material conditions of the day. So we're not going to just like repeat the Russian Revolution like step by step.
Okay. I understand it adapting to the material conditions, but if we see the specific conditions, we can see that decentralization creates more wealth. Decentralization does specifically help, and especially when people do cooperate, as Kropotkin would say, the basis of humanity, that cooperation is the basis of civilization. I think Mises even agrees with that as well. For me,
and it would. I think it would depend which industry we're talking about. Like if we're talking about space exploration, you can't really be decentralized about it. You have to. Well, you have to like put a lot of stuff together. So, and you need organization, and you need directors for that.
Interestingly enough, there's a YouTuber named Sticks Hexenhammer who argued that you needed to have governments to manage nuclear reactors. And my dad got his PhD in nuclear physics from Purdue. So I said, Dad, I'm just curious, you know a little bit more about, have you seen private companies manage nuclear reactors? He's like, yes. Now that's more of the ANCAP paradigm. But what I'm telling you is there's successful things like the Zapatistas, things like Keith talked about with Twin Oaks and stuff like that. So I'd encourage you, you can look at Marx and Engels and but also say, hey, I'm going to dip into the Kropotkin, Malatesta side, things like that, and actually see where it's going there. Because the basis of, like you're saying, you have local governments. What I say is, hey, keep it local and keep it voluntary, and you'll be surprised how well it works with other societies.
And like just to be clear, there are a lot of like benefits to seeking the anarchist form of state, or like anarchist form of leftism rather than the statist form. And one of the benefits that I've seen is that a lot of right wingers, when they're trying to like get into this sort of thing, when they're trying to figure out liberation, they're going to look at how historical societies have eventually resulted. That's their like sort of analysis of material conditions, is the resulting material conditions resulting from the societies that have adopted certain ideas. And in this case, one of the concrete things that can be seen is that every society, and this is something where Chris and I have argued before, is that every society that has claimed in some way to be an alternative to state capitalism has used state capitalism. Mao literally wrote that he's going to employ it in letters and papers and public statements. These are available on Marxism.org, Marxists.org, something like that. It's also available on Maoist library websites like official Chinese publications. Lenin wrote that the way things had become after the dictatorship of the proletariat took over was not remarkably different to the way that it had been run before, and that the only thing that was really different was like sort of labeling. He said that this was reason for reform, but it basically didn't get much of that past when he wrote that. And so for me, when I'm looking at the actual like generated material conditions that were created as a result of these ideologies, I see failures to actually liberate. And when I look at like, for instance, when I'm trying to convince somebody of like, maybe this wouldn't result in just everybody killing each other and people trying to seize power if we like moved away from this like liberal capitalist paradigm. for instance, I was in a Discord having a conversation with a right winger who opposes communism entirely, and had clearly never really even looked into a lot of the radical thinkers. This person's from Hungary, so I cited Ervin's. I'm going to mispronounce this. Ervin Sabo. I always mispronounce that name because it's like a tongue twister. But like he wrote this excellent like essay series, I guess you would say, about Marx and Bakunin, and it was a direct reference to the fact that this Hungarian sympathized with Bakunin and his efforts to decentralize power away from the dictatorships in general, and his understandings of the failures of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Um, and this was as somebody who had been on the ground and seen it firsthand. Like Bakunin saw it firsthand as well. The Bakuninite wing, the Second International, saw it as well. Um, and in this particular case, he wrote a great essay, like sort of series-ish kind of thing that was compiled um, on fucking what was the website? libcom.org, which is a great resource for libertarian communism. Um, and in this series, he went over the fact that basically when you're trying to liberate people, you've got to liberate them based on their own terms and not do it from a top-down isolationist perspective. And you've got to do it based on that, because otherwise you're not really giving them their own choice. You're just taking the choice reins for them. So, like, I'm all about liberation. I'm all about the crushing of the capitalists, but it's sort of one of those things where if you're trying to see where you could improve relations, where you could like get people on board, where you could get that like international solidarity, you gotta like come from the perspective of we're not going to remove your power, we're not going to assume the same power. And so that, like, if it's more of the same, most people are going to walk away, or they're just going to mock it as saying, well, hey, see, this is your free society. So I would ask how you think you can insulate from that, and what your responses would be to that assessment of material conditions on the ground that exist as a result of these societies.
And yeah, and just to add to that, if Keith, you have anything to add to that, I think that would be great. Also, Chris, if you'd be open to it, I want to send you a quick 3-minute video on Malatesta. After we're
I'm
done.
familiar with Malatesta, and I would like a refresher though, so I appreciate it. And like I know, of course, I started out being anarchist, very Kropotkin, very Malatesta was one of my favorites. I liked Rudolf Rocker a lot. I liked a lot of anarchist syndicalism, and like syndicalism still like that's my primary motive, and I'm trying to organize some unions here for call centers actually.
Good.
What would you say to that? I know we talked a lot, Keith, so I'd love to get your thoughts on any of this.
Yeah, well, on a theoretical basis, my approach to the theoretical foundations of anarchism, or whatever we're talking about, is I tend to see the state as an institution that transcends all of these other types of differences like socialism and capitalism, as well as cultural differences and things like that. Because, and well, I should probably qualify what I mean by the state, because some libertarians, like right libertarians, I think have a definition of what the state is.
Watered down bullshit. Yeah.
Right. You know, I mean, I would say that the analogy, I may have mentioned this on a previous stream, but the analogy I like to use is to the Middle Ages. Because in the Middle Ages, you had the king, the monarchy, the king's ministers, the royal dynasties. You had the knights, the king's knights, the military. You had the church and its hierarchy. You had the aristocracy, and then you had the different layers within the nobility. But all of that collectively was the state, or the ruling class, or the power elite, or if it was an imperial system, the empire. And none of that was really socialist or capitalist by modern definitions of those terms.
That's brutal.
And then it was really more like, I guess you could say, feudalism. And then in antiquity, you had command systems, rooted in slavery and agrarian labor and that kind of stuff. So, so I tend to look at it like the critique of the state or ruling class, power elite, blah blah blah. All of that is over and above these other differences. These things like socialism, capitalism, anarchism, Marxism, whatever your opinion about any of that is. And I tend to think that any belief system can be theoretically co-opted by the ruling class as a means of creating its ideological superstructure. Like one thing the Marxists get right, if they have this idea, well, then and the Marxists will say you have the substructure, the materialist base, the means of production, the mode of production, and then you've got the superstructure, which is like the ideological framework that dominates a particular society and is used to legitimize institutions. For example, in ancient Egypt, it might be the divinity of the pharaoh or something like that, or in Caesarian Rome, it might be the cult of the emperor. Whereas in the Middle Ages, it might be the divine right of kings. In modern societies, its ideas derived from John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, like popular, like the general will and the social contract and that kind of stuff. And we see that in modern societies. We see how the state is able to co-opt any belief system people have, whether it's socialism, communism. This stuff that's constantly being labeled as wokeism. That's to a large degree the power elite co-opting cultural liberalism that came out of the post-war period. And at the same time, the state can co-opt multiple ideological currents at once. Like right now in the United States, we have this culture war, the red tribe, the blue tribe, and all that. But all of those are subordinated to the wider ruling class. So I think the first order of business is to recognize that the ruling class proper is over and above all these other things. And once you understand that, I think you start to understand how state systems actually work. And like Etienne de Bellotay said that the foundation of the ruling class is really the acquiescence of its subjects, because there's a whole lot fewer people who are the ruling class than there are people in general. So as long as people acquiesce to the rulers, then the ruling class is able to maintain its position. And Carl Schmitt took that a little further. He said the basis of political legitimacy is acclamation. That all that means is how much people like and support and approve of their particular state. Like Carl Schmitt argued, well, a dictatorship can theoretically be democratic if most people like it and approve of it. Which, I don't know, maybe you could say that's fairly dubious reasoning, but there is a point there. And when people withdraw consent or withdraw acquiescence or withdraw acclamation from the existing ruling class, that's when you start to see a ruling class lose legitimacy and it starts to crumble, it starts to fall apart. And we can see plenty of examples from that from ancient history as well as modern history. So I think that we need to start by recognizing that. And then you can start getting into the different, specific economic critiques and social critiques. Like, you have the libertarians and the Marxists and the anarcho-syndicalists and anarcho-communists and other things that are peripheral or overlapping with that. But if you want to understand this first point, I think you're already halfway there. And then there's the question of organization. Like you don't want to have a model of organization that's going to create a whole new authoritarian system. And there's a lot of things you have to be aware of there. Like, for example, if you look at elite theory, like some of the elite theorists that came out of the 20th century, one of them was Robert Michels. He was a German Italian. And Michels had this idea called the iron law of oligarchy. And that is, the larger an organization is, the more likely it will be an oligarchy where you have the few at the top ruling over the many, which means that you want to try to avoid large organizations as much as possible. Or if you have a large organization, it needs to be more like a federation or a coordinated system. And then you also have one of the insights of a sociologist named Fedor Pareto was that it's called the 80-20 principle. This is something that's discussed in business schools a lot, any kind of academic work where they talk about organizational theory. But the idea is that in any organization, about 20% of the organization will do about 80% of the work that's necessary to sustain the organization. And that ends up being a situation where about 20% of the membership of an organization is the leadership of about 80% of the rest of the organization. So you have to be careful when you are doing organizing, when you're creating organizations, that you have internal mechanisms that make it possible to prevent the centralization of power in an organizational context. Where I think a lot of the Marxist-Leninist paradigm goes wrong is that I think it's overly, well, I have a similar critique of the Marxists that I do with the libertarians, the right libertarians, because both of them tend too much, in my view, towards economic determinism or economic reductionism. In the sense that, if you listen to right libertarians talk, well, everything's just about economic theory. It's like they'll talk about, they'll say, well, socialism doesn't work because you've got the knowledge problem, the calculation problem, the incentives problem, and all that. But I think that they ignore the role of the non-economic and the role of the non-material in many ways, and it's reduced down to this economic reductionism that's basically market good, state bad, but then they don't recognize the ways in which the market is an outgrowth of the state, or parallel to that, the state can be an outgrowth of the market. I mean, the economic institutions and political institutions are not separate from each other. Like, social societies are created by a convergence of factors. Like you've got, political, military, geographical, climate, topographical, cultural, religious, ethnic, and material conditions, and certainly technology and all of that are a part of that as well. So all of these factors blend in together to make a particular society what it is. You can't just say, well, we're just going to take the state out of it and we'll get what we want, because then you have to define what is the state and what is the relationship between the state and all these other institutions, and are those not part of the state? And I think Marxism, I think, gears a little too much towards class determinism, where they say, well, you have this class, like most people, the working class, the wage earners, whatever, who are being oppressed by capital, right? So, and then capital is in control of the state. Well, all we need to do is reverse that, and then the workers will be in control of the state, and then there won't be oppression anymore. And I think that's a really overly narrow view of what the state is, of how economic systems work, of how social classes actually function. And it also
that's my biggest lesson moving to the third world, man.
well, the problem is that it also leaves out the non-material. It doesn't talk about culture. It doesn't talk about the role of the natural environment, the geographical location of the society. Like, for example, why do societies that are close to water tend to be more cosmopolitan, whereas cultures that are more landlocked tend to be oriented towards homogeneity? Well, there's reasons for that. There's geographical and reasons for that turn into economic reasons, that turn into cultural factors. So a lot of the Marxist framework, I think, has the same problem as the right libertarian and classical liberal framework. So I think you to really develop a substantial critique of how power systems work, you've got to include all of these dynamics. You've got to realize that systems of institutional power are a convergence of factors, and the conditions may be different in one place as opposed to another. Like when you look at the role of culture, for example, in shaping radical movements, like Kropotkin, the famous Russian anarchist some of you were mentioning, he looked at different schools of anarchism that were common in his day, and noticed that the individualist anarchists tended to be popular in America and in England in a way that they weren't anywhere else. And the reason for that is obvious, because England and America are these historic bourgeois Protestant cultures where there's this large emphasis on individualism, as well as petty bourgeois economics, free enterprise and all that, as well as the Protestant idea, the priesthood of all believers. Everybody can be his own priest and start his own church and that kind of stuff. Whereas in some of the other cultures that were historically Orthodox or historically Catholic, you saw a much more communal type of society. Also, some of
them Protestants, man, it's just like, you never would have lost the Holy Land if you didn't split.
What was that?
That never would have lost the Holy Land if the Protestants didn't split.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's an interesting book called by an author named David DeLeon. This book goes back to I think about 78 or 79, so it's about half a century old. But it's called The American as Anarchist, and it talks about these anarchistic cultural traditions that you find in historic American society. And it talks about other things too. It talks about like the communist tradition within the United States, like the old CPUSA from the Depression era. But it talks about how Americans have this individualistic culture that's rooted in English Protestantism in a way that you don't find in some cultures. Like I used to be when I was younger, like when I first got into anarchism in the 80s, I was really fascinated with Spanish anarchism from the 1930s during the Spanish Civil War. Okay. And in fact, I knew a couple of elderly anarchists.
Derrida and all them.
Huh?
Derrida and all that.
Oh, yeah. Well, there was a book called The Spanish Anarchist Collectives written by a guy named Sam Dolgoff. And I actually knew Sam back in the day. He was in his 90s at the time. So I actually had a chance to meet him a few times and ask him questions about all this. Also, Murray Bookchin, who was you guys have probably heard of him. He's a famous left-wing anarchist, the New Left era. But he wrote a book on the Spanish Civil War about Spanish anarchism as well. I met him once back in the day, too. But from studying Spanish anarchism, I came to the conclusion that the reason anarchism got to be such a large movement in Spain was because it was largely a replacement for the Catholic Church, because historically Spain was a very Catholic culture. And at the same time, the church was always heavily intertwined with the establishment, which meant that the common people became very alienated from the church. So what they did, I think, was that anarchism, which fit well with peasant traditions, like in communal traditions in Spain. Like there was an Austrian monarchist named Erich von Kuhnert-Ladin that wrote about this. He wrote about how in Spain you had these different kinds of quasi-anarchistic traditions that precede modern ideologies. And he talks about out of the factions of the Spanish Civil War, you had the left-wing anarchists, the CNT, the FI, and all that. And then one of their rivals were the Carlists, and they were like this Catholic village community oriented movement as well. Although they were from the right, but it was like, I guess you could say it was a type of right wing anarchism or anarcho monarchism or something. But one thing, the conclusion I came to from studying Spanish anarchism was that Spanish anarchism was largely Catholicism without God, in the sense that they had the same kind of idea of the universal church, or the universal humanity, and the commune and the parish and all that kind of stuff that you see in medieval Catholicism, particularly in hardcore Catholic countries like Spain. But they basically kicked out the priests and they kicked out the church hierarchy and that kind of stuff. And that's why they hated the Catholic Church so much. That's why they burned down Catholic churches during the Civil War, because they looked at it like the church had betrayed them. And so anarchism became the new church. And there were tendencies of Spanish anarchism that were very ascetic. They were very moralistic. Like they would renounce tobacco, they would renounce alcohol, they would renounce meat. Almost like straight edge or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But all of that it was rooted in the culture of the society.
Vegan in 30s Spain, that must have been rough.
Yeah, vegetarian. I don't know about vegan. I think there were some that renounced eating meat as for political or social reasons or ascetic reasons. Although it's also true that there were people in the Spanish Civil War that when they took over all the industry and collectivized it, you had Spanish peasants that had never even seen cooked meat. I mean, that's how poor these people were.
I've seen it.
They were just basically used to eating raw meat and stuff like that.
Yep.
Oh, Jerry, you should come out here and live as a peasant, bro.
Wait.
Sorry, I'm back.
Was there a question directed at Mirzam?
Yeah, I was saying, man, you should come out here and live as a peasant, bro.
Well, Duarte is not that great with peasants, so maybe you need to throw some. After you get that video, share it with him. Be like, bro, I don't like your drug war. But
where are you in the Philippines, if you don't mind saying?
I'm in a province called Iloilo.
Okay.
and I got like an acre of land out here, and I have a maid, but I'm working. So I mean, like, it's a very strange economy here.
Yeah.
So, like, my whole deal is like when I think of like the state, I don't just consider it some sort of like official organization, and you'll probably agree with this, Keith. Probably like I can even probably get Chris on the same page, but we've had like somewhat frictional discussions about this before, to say the very least. But basically, I consider the state to be that which is controlling on an official level, or benefited from the control on an official level, um, that comes from the top down. So, if a media organization is being a stenographer for the CIA, they're the state.
Mhm.
If the CIA is donating money, and by donating I mean putting a leash on a dog so that an organization like Facebook can get its seed funding, then Facebook is part of the state. If like if they're running like interference for statist positions in exchange for kickbacks, like so many politicians do, um, or like if they're part of an organization that assists those politicians in their propaganda efforts, like all these Koch founded like pro-conservative orgs, or like, you know, fucking these organizations that for some reason just can't get rid of pro-war pedophiles like Scott Ritter. um you know, like when like you have all these organizations that are like directly benefiting from, and therefore running cover and propaganda and policy, like funding positions, proposals, blah blah, for this, for the controllers. When all of this is the way it consistently works, the banks, the mega corporations, which help them isolate power and prevent the small businesses from competing by undercutting them. Like when they have all of these sorts of like hooks into like the way society works, um when the churches are like, I had a church that I went to um when I was a kid, and even when I became a filthy atheist as an adult, um this church still had some services that my family would occasionally ask me to go to, so I'd be like, fine, whatever. And then I would heavily criticize what I heard afterward. Like the exchange was basically, you have to deal with my shit if I go to this shit. And one of the things that they started to do was hand out these voter guides. And these voter guides, I swear to fuck, I'm not making this up. It sounds like a goddamn cartoon. These voter guides would be pamphlets with a law and proposition, and it would be like how to vote in a godly way. And they wouldn't explain to you why. I'm not fucking making this up. It's going to sound like bullshit. They would have a thumb up emoji, or two thumbs up emojis if it was really godly, and a thumb down emoji or two thumbs down emojis if it was really not. And that's all the information they got. So it's like, that's obvious, transparent statism. These people are trying to operate the rungs of power. They were heavily connected to local military bases. They were parts of like local efforts to basically launder money into the church. It was very corrupt. So I consider that church a part of the state, and I know that there are countless churches that operate exactly the same fucking way, to reify their
Like
power.
the level of state, I would say, maybe like not nation state,
What? But
but
see,
your local state.
but see,
Your local state for sure.
I'm considering them all enmeshed, and especially when these states are intercooperative and interoperative on an international level, on an organizational base for an international level, to build up sort of power centers in certain places and spread like a cancer. Um, these sorts of things, like that's the reason China wants their soft power in places like Africa, and it's the reason the US and the World Bank and IMF have been doing this shit for a while, is because once you get your tendrils in, you can start spreading like cancer, you can metastasize. So when I'm talking about the state, I'm talking about this giant structure. Now obviously the closer you get to the centers, the closer you get to like the actual central poles, the stronger the power becomes. But the power still descends to all these tiny little tendrils. If you think of it like a central nervous system or a cardiovascular system, you know, you've got your major arteries, you've got your fucking small sorts of blood vessels that lead to the capillaries. You've got your tiny little like inlets toward the various finer tissue elements of the body, and you can manipulate that, which is how cocaine works. Like you can get like the access to like the surface level of the circulatory system, and you can sort of absorb things into it, right? That's the reason.
Wouldn't that be a good thing?
Well, I'm saying this is an analogy. I'm not saying that like everything is permeable. I'm not saying that, you know, like the state is fucking wonderful for the body. What I am saying is that all these things are like little tendrils and capillaries and things that come from the main sort of beating hearts of power. And when you look at it that way, it doesn't matter that it's like come down to a tiny little funnel. It doesn't matter if the power further away from the center like is somehow less. What matters is that it's all part of the same interoperable power structure, because the fact is that most people aren't going to think twice about like their local, you know, community center. They're not going to think twice about their local, like, you know, HOA, except when they like say your grass is a little too high, or we're going to fine you for putting a sticker on your window. Like most of these people aren't going to consider those the same level as, for instance, a cop or an FBI agent or Raytheon. They're not going to consider them at the same level, but they are. They're all operating as an interoperable agent of power. And so when I'm considering all of these people the state, I'm saying that we need to do things that are competitive. We need to have a competitive body to the state that does not operate as the state, because otherwise we might as well just be forming a new power structure, a new set of power tendrils. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is if the state operates to enrich capital, and if the state capital apparatus like runs toward, you know, centralization, runs toward monopolization, runs toward resource accumulation by several major powers, and then doling that out to whoever like kisses the hand enough. All this sort of thing is going to create that structure, the state capitalist structure. And when you end up with this, you end up with varying levels of state capitalist control in various places. But it's all still that. It's capital and the state serving each other interoperably in order to create the control structure. And so my personal thing is, I think that like it's valuable to remember that the term capitalism originated for a reason, and it was because it was designed to describe a bad system. Like ANCAPs and, you know, like classical liberal folks, like they generally tend to try to co-opt the terminology. And Rothbard himself said that state capitalism is the alternative to ANCAP. And if we're going to keep the term at all, we should, like, you know, acknowledge the difference that one relies on the power structure and not voluntary anything. And so basically, like, if we can start to realize this, if we can start to realize that all of these interoperable power elements that are connected to the powerhouses, the, you know, proverbial mitochondria, the fucking hearts, the whatever you want to say and make this analogy work, like those are what we need to create alternatives to, or we're fucked. And this system's going to keep on moving on the same way it always has. And it doesn't matter where we move, except that maybe one place might be cheaper until like the eventual destruction of the whole planet, because there are too many insane people with their hands on too many big red buttons. Like,
I live in the best spot for that.
yeah, right? Yeah. So, like, my whole point is I want out of this structure, and I know that I can't just opt out. I can't just say I'm good. They will find a way to fuck me anyway. So my whole goal is, you know, and even if I could, I want to stop them from hurting other people. I want to stop them from being able to do the kinds of things that they do. So my goal is to fight them where they are. And I'm encouraging that in as many different people as possible. My goal is to crush the machine. I want to smash the state. And
maybe we can gather that many like anti-state people inside of the state. We can gather them outside of it.
okay, but there is no outside the state. Like there is no like solid, like huge block of anarchist territory. What we're dealing with here is like globalism, global statism, neoliberal fascism. And when we have that, the state has their omnipresent eyes everywhere. That's the real reason Starlink is being built. And it's fucking hilarious to me that all these anti-globalists are on Elon Musk's side when he demonstrated his willingness to shut down the internet for his political beliefs. Like, that's a bad sign, I would think. But, like, what it really means is that the people who are at the reins of power, those controllers, they get, like, to control things, and we don't. I want that stopped. And you can't just stop that by moving. You have to stop that by building groups of people who are interested enough in, to be YouTube safe, direct action and mutual aid, totally non-violent, I promise, that you can eventually subvert these power structures where you are, peacefully, I promise. And you can eventually, like, get there in the local areas, convince people that this is actually the, like, ethical thing to do, and then maybe you'll get a movement together. But until you get your like people on the same page, until you get this being global movements of like people who understand this philosophy of freedom and see the state, see the behemoth, understand all the capillaries, can recognize different organs of the system, you know, no matter how far away they are from the power centers, until that happens, it's going to keep spreading. And the nature of the spread is, the nature of the sprawl is, you can watch this with the way they built their statist cities, it's going to spread like a fucking cancer. Like, I'm not Malthusian, but I can see where Agent Smith was coming from. When he said that humans are not good for the planet in their present form. Now, obviously, Agent Smith was a massive hypocrite, because the robots that had built the dystopia, which we are heading into because AI is evil, the robots had destroyed the surface planet, and they had to build this universal, like, you know, control grid into.
I mean, it looks like a huge
like
gold mine for a silicon-based life form.
Yeah, right. But like, but like, what I'm saying is, like, if they think that humans are a virus because they destroy everything, I mean, you can't really do that making the planet look like that, you know? You gotta. So my goal is to not become Smith while still understanding the problems Smith was designed to address, you know? And there's a paradigm. There's a thing that you have to, like, if you're really gonna fight these fuckers, there's a thing that you have to, like, assume, which is that they are watching everything, they are listening to everything, they are controlling everything, they've got interests in every potential, like, fuckhole that you could have. And, like, the whole deal is, if we don't get them where they are, we lose. And so my whole deal, that's the reason I'm not going to migrate anywhere. And so because if I do that, that's ceding all the territory to them. It's letting them win. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to crush them. And also, because I have to book in 10 minutes, and because Keith and I have been talking a lot, I feel like that would be a good time to give you, like, some uninterrupted talking time to respond to all this, because, like, I feel like you've got a lot of information to respond to. If you want, up to you.
Me or who are you?
Chris.
Okay.
And like, I kind of do. There's this like sailboat race coming up soon, and I kind of want to, like, I have somewhat of a goal to build a navy.
Well, I mean, that'd certainly be a thing, but seasteading efforts generally tend to get crippled by international whatever. So if you did want to build a navy, you would have to do it completely covertly and not just say, here's where I am.
I mean, it's a very remote area as it is, so pretty easy actually to do that.
Well, if you keep it quiet, because like the thing about the previous like seasteading and seafaring efforts is that like they were like, here's my pontoon, here's where I am, and then they got real surprised when these people said, hey, actually, we're still governments and we'll still fuck you up.
I think a multipolar world opens like a time for that.
Potentially. Or it just means that the smaller powers will be made examples of. See, I'm a pessimistic asshole, but I like at least you can say that I've thought about this for some time.
And I don't accept the pessimism. I got some pretty sweet goals in Pirate Fleet.
I mean, if you want to like be Luffy, then like I mean, I guess go for it. But the general superstructure is not going to approve of your actions.
Fair enough, but I'll just break this down because they gave Keith and Sandy gave really good explanations. But I'll just say this: like your everyday interactions are not mediated by like Duarte. Duarte actually, his government probably is not capable of doing very much. The currency's been devalued, so I'd just say, hey, your everyday interactions are anarchistic. Even leaving reviews on what I would say restaurants. That's a decentralized decision that no central institution is telling you to do. It's just interact. You could call it like Satoshi would call a P2P interaction. Most of our interactions take place in that context. And somehow societies, even without stable governments, are able to function. So if that's the case, we have to look at what mechanisms, what things are actually making that work. What makes actual everyday life work? And to me, it's reputation. You put trust in certain people to do certain actions of the work. Signaling, which is just saying, hey, this guy has reputation, and I see, oh, okay, they've had a seasteading license, or not a license, but a seasteading something that they've got. So, okay, I'll trust them. And then eventually get to things like clubs or organizations. And then overall, that's customary law. You get like, okay, well, we're all going to follow common law, Christianity, this law of the land. And that's what dictates social order. And if you go seasteading, you'll see pirates came up with their own constitution. So yeah, I encourage all pirate activity as long as it's not coercive. With the exception, I understand what the Houthis are doing.
They're just cars, bro.
Anyway, like I just talked for a long time. So anybody else got some?
I agree with what Jeremiah was saying about the nature of the state, in the sense that the state or ruling class, power elite, whatever terminology we want to use, has its tentacles in everything, and it's also layered. For instance, if you've ever dealt with local governments as an activist, as I have, around things like housing and that kind of stuff, you see that local governments tend to be controlled by oligarchies of real estate interest and the most powerful businesses in town, and then corporations that have a branch in whatever city or town you're in. So it's like a feudatory. It's like a modern version of a feudatory from the Middle Ages. And then if you deal with Jeremiah was talking about church. A lot of these mega churches are run by guys who are really just clerical oligarchs. I mean, they're no different than medieval priests with their ruling over their own parishes and monasteries and church lands and that kind of stuff. These guys like Joel Osteen. The town I came from was like that. The town I grew up in was ruled by the Falwell family. So they,
ruled by the Falwells. Oh my God, man!
Everybody cringe at once.
They're clerical oligarchs, basically, And education, like schools, really serve the same purpose as seminaries in older societies. Like colleges and universities, as well as schools, are really modern seminaries because what they do is they are the institutions that disseminate the value system of the ruling class. Like for example, when I was a kid, I went to a private religious school, and every day the first thing you did was you said the pledge to the U.S. flag, then the pledge there's a pledge to the Christian flag. You said that, and then you said a pledge to the Bible, right? So what they're trying to do is inculcate you with this kind of right wing American, Protestant, evangelical, patriotic kind of paradigm. But in the more mainstream educational system, they have a
Did he get
variation.
to fly in the private jet?
Huh?
Did he get to fly in the private jet?
No. Now, my family knew the Falwell family, but no, I wasn't that involved in their organization. But I wasn't part of that. I was a part of something similar. But
Dude, was all that funding like religious like trickery, or was there like cocaine involved?
it's just a cult, basically. I mean, it's like any of the other cults, like the Unification Church, Scientology, the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses. There are tons of cults, and they're all over the place, all kinds of beliefs. And that's what this was. But the media is another institution. Like the media is also part of the modern church. Because the role of the church in the Middle Ages was it was the institution that disseminated the values and ideology of the wider society, and that's what the media and the educational system do in modern societies. And the church is still there too, but it's also shares space with all these other institutions. Like somebody like see how the media is so obsessed with Taylor Swift nowadays. Like all she is just a modern version of some medieval princess, like some medieval songstress or something, and
Just
it's like
Madonna, man. Like the fuck.
right. Oh yeah, right. Well, us old guys, we remember Madonna and characters like that from the 80s, and going back further, there were other people, So but the media is the institution that disseminates values. Like, I mean, there are people, if you look at comments people make on NBC and stuff, there are people that obviously probably don't know what to do with themselves during the few minutes when MSNBC is on commercial break, or Fox, or one of these ruling class TV channels, because they're just so absorbed in that stuff. It's like and it's and that's why American politics is like sports. It's like everybody's got their favorite team, and then the election is like the Super Bowl or something. And it's really not even like the Super Bowl. It's really more like pro wrestling, because it's really staged. It's but all of that is part. All these political interest groups that are connected to the political parties are part of the state as well. Like you could argue that on the liberal side, Planned Parenthood; on the right wing side, National Rifle Association. Whatever your point of view on guns or abortion or whatever, you can argue all of those are part of the state, because they're all political interest groups whose power and influence depends on the state. The NRA, their influence depends on their connections to the Republican Party. Something like there's a wide variety of Democratic Party constituent groups or interest groups that are connected to the party, but all of that is part of the party apparatus as well. So and each of these institutions has its own little fiefdom, like universities, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, all these places are little fiefdoms that have their own institution, or like monasteries, or like modern monasteries, with their own institutional hierarchies and that kind of stuff, and their own value systems. So I think that the key is we need to have both an intellectual culture and a popular culture that recognizes this stuff. I think that's the number one problem. If people do not think in a better way, then they're not going to produce better institutions and better societies, because they're not going to know what they're doing. It's
Yeah,
kind
that
of
would
like,
be funny, man. If like when it's election season over there, if you were just like you got the mic and they're like, "Excuse me, Mister Ralph Smith, Could you list which organization specifically you are in? Like, just every time. That would be so great.
Well, one advantage we have nowadays is that the American political class just seems to be an ever greater number of idiots. I mean, you always had unscrupulous.
I hope you guys get Nikki Haley as a president. That would make my fucking world.
Well,
But,
we've got Joe now. Joe who can't remember what country he's in, or something came out today where Joe was talking about how he was meeting with Helmut Kohl, the Chancellor of Germany. That guy was Chancellor of Germany like 40 years ago. That's back when I was a kid when Helmut Kohl.
If this is still going on in an hour, probably I will come back on, possibly during my workout. But I'm going to bounce up early.
Yeah, I actually have to leave myself. So, yeah, but good talking with you guys. Nice meeting you, Chris.
Yeah, you guys too. Yeah, Happy New Year. Happy Year of the Dragon.
All right.
Be well, all.
Cheers.
All right. Later.
Cheers. So, I want to thank everybody. Definitely, Chris. Connect with me on X, Twitter, whatever the heck it is, at Cream6633. Another awesome discussion, guys. And I'll catch you in the next one.
Later.